My name is Dhull, and I'm doing my PhD from Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. So I'll be talking about uniformed female peacekeepers with a critique of instrumental approach that is embedded in UNSCR 1325. Give me 2 minutes. I'll just share the screen with you. Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So this is the layout of my presentation. I'd be talking about women in uniformed roles in peacekeeping missions, starting with the groundbreaking resolution that got adopted in 2000, which is UNSCR 1325, and how it, in the process of implementation, it has become more of instrumental in nature. And I'd be providing a feminist analysis to this as because feminist analysis has brought gender variable in the analysis of conflict and violence, conflict resolution. So there are various strands of feminism, which are basically arguing for the normative framework to have gender analysis within the military culture, such as those of UN peacekeeping. So the feminist analysis basically examines the normative aspect of in the military affairs in peace and security, which caters to gender awareness or other norms of gender equality and gender mainstreaming. Now talking about United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325. So this resolution redefined the norms about gender and conflict all across the world. It has 18 brief points and 4 pillars. So before delving into what is the content of UNSCR, so I would be talking about the core message of this agenda. So the core message of this agenda was to increase the participation of women during all phases of conflict, so that women have a greater voice in conflict resolution, conflict prevention, and post-conflict reconstruction. So this was a vision of culmination of long-standing demand of acknowledging the disproportionate and differential impact of conflict on women and girls. And it was a culmination of various feminist projects such as 4 world conferences, the last one, and the milestone one being the Beijing Conference on Women in 1995, which basically advocated for female participation in all aspects of peace processes. So UNSCR 1325 institutionalizes the norms of gender balance within security organizations such as those of United Nations peacekeeping operations. It has 4 pillars which talks about, or they are shortly also known as 4 Ps. First talks about the participation or increasing the effective and meaningful participation of women in all aspects of peace processes. Second talks about protection of vulnerable section, and the vulnerable sections are identified as women and girls in conflict-prone and conflict-affected societies. Third, it talks about integrating the perspective of conflict prevention or integrating the gender perspective in prevention and conflict resolution. We'll be talking about what is this gender perspective normatively and how is it translating into practice later on. Fourth one is provision of relief and recovery to the affected population. So now if we see these 4 pillars, when I talk about instrumental critique or when I talk about the instrumental perspective, so the sole responsibility of maintaining these 4 pillars has slowly, while in implementation, been relegated to only women. And this is where instrumental critique comes in. Before talking about instrumental critique, a brief about what is WPS Agenda or Women, Peace and Security Agenda. So United Nations Security Council 1325, along with its associated 10 other resolutions, is collectively known as Women, Peace and Security Agenda. It is basically a global wholesome international policy framework which have various themes, but the key focus is on gender equality, to have gender mainstreaming in the peace processes, and larger in the security establishment, to have inclusive peace, sustainable peace, and mainly to combat sexual and gender-based violence in conflict-related situations, which is a prevalent problem that United Nations is facing these days as the security environment is getting more and more complex. So Women, Peace and Security Agenda talks about the historical exclusion of women's voices in peace processes. Although there has been a considerable academic literature on the role and participation of women in the history, throughout the history in peace processes. But what the feminist project has been talking about, or the historical project of feminism is talking about, it talks about first to have the inclusion of women's voices in peace processes, and this resolution was a milestone. It is considered as a milestone because the resolution was achieved by a wide transnational network of women across local and international NGOs, civil society organizations, women from various member states, UN agencies, and academic feminists. So it was kind of an informal alliance or cooperation between women who very differently positioned in relations to structures of power, or differently located in different conditions in relation to wars or security conditions. So this project dates back to the time of First World War, when civil society organization, or women mainly, they advocated for peace principles, also known as 1915 Hague Principles, and then successively followed by 4 World Women Conferences, the main one being the Beijing Platform for Action, also known as the 4th World Women Conference in 1995 in Beijing. So it talks about inclusion of women as well as inclusion of the perspective of gender mainstreaming in the WPS agenda. So there are 2 broad categories through which WPS agenda can be categorized. First is, these are the resolutions which talk about increasing women's active and effective participation in all aspects of peace, be it starting from the prevention of conflict, then arbitration, negotiation, and to have women on decision-making table. And second, it talks about, first, it acknowledges that there is a prevalence of tactical use of sexual violence or use of rape as a tactic of war. So, and then it talks about preventing these tactical use and weaponization of conflict-related sexual violence, and also the prevalence of sexual exploitation and abuse by peacekeepers also. Now, the focus of my presentation is on UN peacekeeping. So this is a representation of various processes of UN peace agenda or UN peace machinery, which starts from conflict prevention, then comes when the conflict has erupted, peacemaking, peace enforcement, and at last comes peacekeeping. However, after the end of Cold War, so the nature of peacekeeping has transformed tremendously. Earlier, it used to be just as a peacekeeping mission, as the word suggests. The main purpose was to oversee or to keep the observance of ceasefire delimitation between the 2 belligerent parties, or which happen to be 2 different states. But after the end of Cold War, the nature of conflict has changed, and conflict has become more of intrastate in nature. So there has been transformation from traditional peacekeeping missions to multidimensional peacekeeping missions. Multidimensional in the sense that now peacekeeping missions are no longer only taking care of the observance of ceasefire violations, but they have socio-economic and political responsibility as well to take care in the conflict-affected regions where there are multiple factions fighting against each other, or also called as civil war situation. So peacekeeping is basically a mechanism to ensure peace in conflict-affected regions, and it is one of the various stages of peace processes, as I showed in the last slide. It is different from conventional understanding of military in its structure, because the structure of peacekeeping contingent includes both uniformed as well as non-uniformed, or also known as civilian population. It is also different from a military in its operations and tactics. And it runs on three core principles. First is consent of parties. Consent of parties means consent of the host country. Second, impartiality of these peacekeeping forces. When they go on ground, they have to be impartial in their letter and spirit, and also in their practice, in their day-to-day work, and in the achievement of the mandates of the mission. And third and most important one is the non-use of force. They can use force only in self-defense or for the achievement of the mandate of the mission. So now talking about the categories of peacekeepers, or what I mean when I say that uniformed female peacekeepers. So as I said earlier, the structure of the peacekeeping is very different from conventional military. So it consists of both uniformed as well as non-uniformed peacekeepers. Military basically provides a secure environment as a precondition so that other elements of peace agreements take place. It is also involved in monitoring disputed borders and assisting in disarmament and rehabilitation, also known as DDR. The main purpose or the function of police is to reinforce and re-establish security. So military and police, they work in tandem with each other, also in collaboration with the civilian population, whose main work is to promote human rights, helping the socio-economic and political infrastructure of the country that is affected, or the conflict affected society. Now talking about uniformed female peacekeepers. So United Nations Department of Peace Operations launched its uniformed gender parity strategy in 2018, which has set a target by 2028 so that women should constitute 15% of the deployed troops, means the military component, 20% of the formed police unit. It comprises of both paramilitary as well as police component, and 30% of individual police officers. So these targets have been met by so the accountability of meeting these targets, UN has set the targets. Now the accountability of meeting these targets is on the member states. So member states has to contribute to the call given by United States, and then they contribute their own troops or police in their capacity. And these troops or police officers or the paramilitary officers are basically the already members of the respective national armies, national police forces from these countries. However, there has been a lack of compliance in meeting the targets, and scholars have attributed this to two reasons. First, the reluctance of TCCs or the troop contributing countries to send more women in the riskier environment due to the fear of adverse public opinion in their domestic politics. Second, it talks about that this low participation is basically the reflection of composition of national level military and police structures of member countries. Now, if we see this slide, then the figure on, or the table on the left side shows the figure of total personnel involved or total personnel deployed in all the current ongoing missions, that are 11 in number, and what is the percentage of women that are deployed here. So the second reason that scholars have been attributing is clearly seen here, which is the target of achieving gender parity has been met in all the three categories of formed police unit, staff officer, and individual police. It is only in the troops category that the target is not yet achieved. So this is where scholars have been attributing those two reasons for the non-fulfillment of target. Also, if we see the total number of women deployed as compared to the total number of personnel deployed. So it is very meager, or merely 16% of the total number of personnel that are deployed in UN peacekeeping missions. Still, from this small number of deployed troops, the expectations of UN has been tremendous, and it is again and again shown that the main purpose of inclusion of women is to achieve operational effectiveness. So this is where the narrative analysis of UNSCR and different reports, speeches from United Nations Secretary General and gender advisors come into place. So the narrative analysis talks basically, the narrative analysis that I have come across so far, it can be broadly divided into two categories. First is rights-based approach. So rights-based approach would see gender parity, gender equality, gender representation as ends in themselves, or making these norms central to all the activities of military missions or UN peacekeeping missions. So it highlights the inclusion of women in military and police due to some practical reasons, such as to have just number of gender balanced force, or the same practical reasons as men are joining these forces: stable jobs, decent salaries, opportunities, or to prove their capability and professionalism, even in the male dominated and masculinized oriented services like military. However, the instrumentalist approach argues that the integration of women in peacekeeping is primarily undergirded by an instrumentalist perspective. And this instrumentalist perspective is basically aimed as for the effectiveness of the missions, to build trust with the local communities. And we should see it in a context where United Nations peacekeeping missions are facing resistance increasingly from the local communities. So this is the instrumental approach where women are being deployed on the field in order to pacify the resistance and to gain trust from the local communities. A few scholars have highlighted that this concept of gender balance, which was initially developed as a rights-based idea or for the promotion of participation of women, with time has gained a traction of being the functionalist or instrumentalist argument. Now, if we dig deeper into where this instrumentalist argument can be traced, so first, a language analysis of UN resolution itself says that the primary objective is to harness the specific and unique characteristics which are associated with femininity. So the prime reason for integrating women into a peacekeeping mission is to increase the efficacy of the missions. And this has been in the words clearly stated in the speeches made by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres in 2021. Also, prior to that, United Nations Secretary General has also mentioned that gender parity is not an end in itself, rather it is a means to achieve operational efficiency or to have greater effectiveness. A language analysis of the documents by a few scholars have also mentioned that we have to see that female personnel have specific capabilities, such as they assist in engendering trust, allaying fears, they improve the reputation of peacekeepers, normalize the presence of troops, and positively facilitating the peace processes. Now, in my understanding, these specific concerns or issues in focus, they appeared out because of the contextual experiences of peacekeepers or erstwhile peacekeepers, which necessitated the deployment of more women, given the cultural realities and operational challenges encountered by the male soldiers, or also due to the recurrent instances of sexual and gender-based violence being committed by male peacekeepers. So this clearly indicates operational rationale behind inclusion of women in peacekeeping operations. Instrumentalist perspective in practice is also seen that, and current scholarship has talked about it and have also analyzed theoretically as well as the stated objectives and motivations of WPS agenda. So it talks that it talks about the vital role that women have in reaching out and gaining the trust of women and girls within local community. So this utilitarian perspective of reaching out to women, by women, for women, clearly indicates the presence of instrumentalist approach. Another important mandate of the mission is to add the legitimacy to the peacekeeping missions. Because as I said earlier, these days we have seen that the recent closure of peacekeeping mission in Mali was due to because the local communities were not giving their consent for the continuation of UN peacekeeping mission on their sand, on their soil. So that is why it has become very important for United Nations to have the legitimacy to their ongoing peacekeeping missions, and women are considered to be instrumental in achieving those mandates. Again, gender equality in the host country is argued to be promoted by uniformed female peacekeepers within the host country. And this we have seen that when when a all female contingent from India went to Liberia. So United Nations Secretary General's speech mentioned that it certainly helped in the increase of gender balance within the Liberian National Police. So the last argument about tracing of instrumentalist perspective is also relates to reducing the sexual and gender-based violence as well as conflict-related sexual violence. So the underlying assumption is that the victims of sexual exploitation and abuse are mainly women, and they are more prone to open out to other women. That is why we need more women on field. So we have to see this in a context or where feminist analysis, how would a feminist analysis would examine this is that they are not challenging the problem here. They are basically managing the situation by putting more women on the ground or portraying women bodies as pacifying effects in the host countries. Empirical studies on this instrumentalist approach have also shown a correlation or association of increasing the women peacekeepers with the increase in the women's right provisions in these conflict affected regions. I have already talked about all women formed police unit from Liberia, where the Liberian president herself congratulated, and basically it was considered a massive success because the all women police unit there contributed or they were considered as role models for increasing the gender balance in Liberian police. However, a few studies have also shown contradictory to what the above studies was showing, that these are just token gestures where females were given gendered division. Females were given certain tasks which were gendered in nature, such as desk jobs or not allowing to go for patrolling in the night hours. So these are just token gestures. And also, when talking about the experience of peacekeepers, women peacekeepers who are working in these areas, so there have been studies who have highlighted the challenges for women peacekeepers to adjust themselves or to operate in an enabling environment. Enabling environment in the sense the lack of proper infrastructure for them or lack of dedicated funding for them or the lack of basic gender awareness training within mixed units. So what are the critical responses to this instrumentalist approach? First, critical response is basically that this is based on the essentialized notions of gender roles, which is not challenged or acknowledged. Rather, it is being celebrated. And second, it talks about biodeterminism, which basically, as Antickner calls it, that it reduces the complex socio-economic political dynamics to merely biological determinism. And it also talks about the gendered assumptions of femininity that are there in the assumptions of how UN operationalizes this. So with this objective of policing of women by women, so the induction of women in peacekeeping is mainly utilitarian in nature, and thus it strengthens the essentialist notions. A few scholars have also said that this is just add and stir attitude of gender mainstreaming because sexual division of labor still exists. Also, if we see it from feminist analysis, then I also feel that the resolution is left hostage to cooptation by militarist states and military institutions for military purposes. And the military purpose is to enhance the operational effectiveness in these missions, which has a larger purpose of to gain credibility of United Nations peacekeeping operations worldwide. So this rhetoric versus practical realities in operational field is also another critical response. And I have managed to interact with a few peacekeepers who have been on ground, and I have also found that the practical realities on the field are way different than what has been considered in rhetoric. So in conclusion, I would say that, so this is a very, I found this quote very ironic also in the sense how this UNSCR was thought and how has it been implemented. So it says that what have we have seen therefore is that after decades of trying to exclude women from combat roles on the basis that they might impair operational effectiveness, the script has been flipped, and it has been flipped now in the sense that by including more and more women, the operational effectiveness would enhance. So this change come into a context where United Nations peacekeeping missions are not primarily military institutions, and it basically contrasts with the normative dimension of gender representation and gender mainstreaming. So we have to see this in the context of utility versus norm. Also, what it does, this utilitarian perspective or instrumentalist perspective, is that it places unrealistic expectations on women soldiers, which their male counterparts are not expected to perform. So there comes a question of fairness as well. So also, we have to think that gender mainstreaming is not the responsibility of women alone. It is a responsibility, or it is a human element which should be the responsibility of the whole missions. And if we see, we have to talk about experience of peacekeepers as well. We can't just say that the very presence of women on the field would enhance the operational effectiveness. We have to see how their experience is playing out and whether there are gender divisions of task or there is lack of inclusive infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Anu, and for that very interesting paper. And, I think we often think that because there are more women in peacekeeping, that we are actually changing the perceptions of women in peacekeeping, and that we're also reducing gender-based violence. And what you're saying is that an instrumentalist notion does not really do that. So I'm now opening the floor for questions, discussion. Can we just have, because I can't see now, change the view. I can't change the view. Thank you.
May I go first while people are composing their questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, Anna.
Anu, can you tell us a little bit more about the interviews that you did? You mentioned that you'd spoken to peacekeepers. Who were these people and what did you talk to them about?
Ma'am, I conducted interviews with both men and male and female peacekeepers.
Indians.
And Indians only. Some of them were, like, two of them were military observers there, and their main purpose was to just to observe the ceasefire violations. And they were mentioning that while they were on the field, they had not even think of women being integrated into the peacekeeping mission. So they were considering this as a new and relatively nascent development in the field. However, their assumptions were also, when I was talking, their assumptions were also instrumentalist, because they were saying that women have tendency to be more peaceful, they have a pacifying effect on and they were saying that they have seen such kind of experiences where women have proven to be, effective for the operations of UN peacekeeping. Although while I interacted with female peacekeepers, so they were mentioning certain challenges like lack of proper infrastructure, or to find a place for themselves, or to, again, they were mentioning that there is, so the difference was, or the difference in experiences were different. So people who have been in mixed units, they were saying that they experienced gendered division of tasks, that you stay in the camps, we'll go for patrolling, and we'll call you once any such case comes or no. However, those people who were from all female formed police units, so they were saying that there was no such gender division of tasks. Rather, on the contrary, I also met the commandant of the first contingent who went to Liberia. So she was mentioning that it was for the first time that there was a whole female contingent, and where auxiliary works were being done by male counterparts. So we have to see it in those lines also. The experiences also differ from mission to mission, from the composition of the mission, and also the host country's politics, how it is. Liberia was a success in my understanding also because the ruling president was herself a woman, and their own national priority was to achieve gender balance in security forces.
So approximately how many men, how many women did you
Ma'am,
speak to?
by far, 5 female and 6 men. So only 11.
Thank you. I mean, I want to, I think that Liberia is an exceptional case because that whole liberation struggle towards the end were driven by women, and that's why
Your voice is very faint, Amanda.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something wrong with my
Better
sound.
now.
Is that better? Yeah. That Liberia is an exceptional case because that last part of the liberation were driven by women, and that's why they also elected the first woman president in Africa.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I wonder what it's like in other countries. But I think my question here is, so if we talk about quotas or targets, right? So you want more women, and then you have what's called descriptive representation. So it's the numbers and the visibility. And what we often find in the literature, and now I'm talking more about, parliaments and things like that, is that if you have women, it changes perceptions of what women can do. So even though there's an instrumentalist use of women, I'm wondering if you've asked any questions about the perceptions of, just having more women, if that makes a difference in how women are perceived as peacemakers.
Thank you, ma'am. This is an interesting track of inquiry that I would like to take forward. Perception definitely makes a difference. That's what I have in the experiences or in the interviews that I have conducted. I have seen that perception makes a difference. However, we have to see that perception. So the women who are changing those perception, are in the leadership roles, or are they in the subordinate roles? So that also, the hierarchy of roles also plays an important role in changing the perception of.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. It is also where you see the women, in what roles they are in. Other questions?
So let me come back to you and ask you yet another ticky-tacky research question. How did you, where are these people served? How many of them were in Liberia and how many were in other places?
Ma'am, one has served in Golan Heights.
Mhm.
One had served in Congo. One was serving in South Sudan right now, and Liberia. So, and Central African Republic. So these are the 5
Okay.
peacekeeping missions that people were serving.
Okay.
I mean, was it possible for you at all to ask questions about gender-based violence? Because I think it's very sensitive.
It is.
But there's, yeah, go ahead.
It was very sensitive, ma'am, and this question was more often was dodged away, like these are aberrations, these are not the norm. Our military is not involved in this. So these are hard questions that you have to, and I'm still struggling and I'm still navigating my way how to be more, how to gain more insight into this domain, because this is an important domain. If you see why women are being deployed there, it is because to reduce the prevalence of this, and I've been reading reports that it has reduced the prevalence. However, while interacting, people are not talking about it. So this is an important observation also, and you flagged it right, that it is a sensitive issue that people are not yet ready to talk about freely.
Sometimes when you raise this, they also give you the party line about how well our own army or their own army is trained. We already do sensitization. Did you hear that?
Yes, ma'am. It was, yeah.
Because I also think the gender-based violence is not only among troops, but it's also towards the local women, right?
It is, ma'am.
And yeah, so and that's very difficult to research, I think.
Exactly. It's,
Any
Professor
other
Hudson,
questions?
would you have a question? I'm sure Anu would benefit from your insights.
Yes, hello, Heidi. Okay. Yeah, so, I think we think of Resolution 1325 as groundbreaking in the sense it was the first time that it gives, it demands voice for women, and it demands also the prosecution, right, of gender-based violence. So if you look at 1325, and I mean, you're not done with your PhD now, but do you think it is serving that purpose?
So the idea behind which, I can't say that it is serving the purpose or not serving the purpose. It's the complexity of implementation, where the norm of, or the norms of gender equality, gender mainstreaming have been slightly distorted in the achievement of, to have more credibility towards peacekeeping missions.
I want to ask you to unpack what you just said, but I see Professor Hudson has a comment, and I would like to hear what she has to say.
Okay.
Good afternoon on my side. Sorry, I was a bit slow the first time round. Thank you very much for your presentation. I just want to check, can you all hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just thinking about the issue of the national action plans. I'm working on that, and I was wondering whether you had a look at that, and to what extent this instrumentalist approach also features in those plans. Because in my view, and maybe you can elaborate on that, is that the way that these plans are written very often determine how it will play out on the ground. And if the plans are written in the wrong language or with the wrong intention, then things can go horribly wrong on the ground level. And then all the hard work of the original intention of 1325 might not be as the way we envisage. So maybe you have some ideas on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question, ma'am. National action plans is an area where I have just started to read more on. However, I have read that national action plans, so there are about 108 countries who have adopted national action plans, and which is basically to have these norms translate into the domestic politics of these respective countries, and how are they implementing those in their own countries. Now, talking about India, so if we see that India does not have a national action plan of its own, although it is considered considered to be the one of the most one of the major troop contributing countries. So there is a prevalent ambivalence over these, which this is what I can infer from it, that on the global stage, the implementation of WPS agenda seems like it is working. However, when it diffuses, so the norm diffuses or infused into the domestic politics, so there is an ambivalence because so many national actors come into play. And so there is an ambivalence. That is what I have inferred so far, although I have yet to cover these aspects of how these national action plans are working. Another case can be of Afghanistan, where we can see the failure of WPS agenda, because even the recent Doha meeting, there was no women representation on the peace talks. So clearly it shows that the norm is very selective in its implementation, or it has been distorted.
But in the case, if you're making that statement, Anu, about Afghanistan, you have to ask, what is the status of an NAP when when the regime has imploded? The regime that makes the commitment to the NAP no longer exists. So who are you then holding accountable and saying the norm does not apply?
It is not
There is still someone you can hold accountable, but who would it be?
UN itself, because when it talks about WPS implementation, it is not only about NAP, it is about the larger perspective of how WPS has failed in Afghanistan. The transition does not happen the way it was supposed to happen. Still, so this is my take on it.
Mm-hmm. You are actually also who was organizing the talks. Many of those countries have NAPs, and those NAPs commit to all of these values. So though that's who you would hold accountable.
Yeah, the global north, basically. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I see we have someone logged in all the way over from Argentina, Amanda.
Can you hear me? Because I've been talking and I don't think you hear me.
No.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Now we can.
No, it's definitely something wrong with my sound. I was just saying that if you take a country like Afghanistan, where there is absolutely no gender equality, where it's so oppressive to women. I mean, these norms then don't, it doesn't translate into anything on the ground. Is there a hand from? You said from Argentina.
No, I said we have someone logged in from Argentina, and they've woken up early to do this. So, is that Dr. Ugolini?
Hello, good morning, dear. Sorry, my English. Hello, hello.
Hello.
How are you? Thank you, and you very interesting your presentation. I'm new in this network, so I'm just hearing. I work with police, not with armed forces in Argentina. Here, the peacekeepers are from the military, so police personnel don't participate in the missions. But it's very interesting that in the police in Argentina, I worked in the University of the Police in the biggest region in Argentina, province of Buenos Aires. We have more women than men today in the recruitment, and the institution is revisiting the requirements for the recruitment because of the organizational mission. They're saying that it's a proletarization and feminization of the force, the police force. So the policing politics are going like to just community policing, and we are trying to have an area that police women can participate in the peacekeepers mission and with the military because of the new missions in the peacekeeping mission. For example, in IT, we have many people of the military working there, but not so many women. So my experience, sorry, is very limited in this aspect, in these questions, but I'm very interested of hearing what's going on in other countries, so different but so similar. Thank you very much for the space. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us so early. Are there any other questions, any remarks? Well, then thank you for everyone who's joined and for your participation, and to Anu, thank you for sharing your research with us, and good luck.